The cruelest twist? The man who saved her was the one who destroyed her first. At first, this feels like a perfect revenge arc. Elena outsmarts the husband who drugged her, faked her pregnancy, and planned her murder. But the script goes nuclear when Adrian, the man helping her take Victor down, turns out to be tied to her parents' deaths. So now the audience is left with the most brutal emotional checkmate possible. She beats one devil by leaning on another. And suddenly, revenge is no longer victory, it is inheritance.
Subject: Elena Moretti. Observation begins as she remains immobilized outside her husband's study, her hand fixed to the doorknob, respecting a previously established psychological boundary. Auditory stimuli from within consist of Victor's voice detailing protocol for her termination. A catalyst object, a positive pregnancy test, is in her possession, its symbolic meaning transmuting from procreation to nullification. The primary trauma is induced by the sound of conspiratorial celebration, confirming the scope of the manipulation of her assets, her biology, and her psyche. She has been party to a lethal contract with her emotional dependency serving as the instrument of consent. The subject's deconstruction is the necessary precursor to her radical behavioral shift. The environment, a rain-swept Boston night in October, provides a fitting external correlation to the subject's internal crisis. Elena Moretti maintains a covert position in the shadows of the residence, presenting with physiological signs of shock unrelated to the ambient temperature. This constitutes a significant deviation from the established narrative for her evening, which placed her in Cambridge with her sister, Maria. There, she was expected to deflect inquiries regarding her deteriorating physical condition, including weight loss and observable tremors. The catalyst for this deviation was a forgotten dose of her prescribed medication, which Victor administered daily under the guise of managing her anxiety. This regimen, initiated 6 months prior by Dr. Hammond, marks the precise timeline of the subject's cognitive decline. Victor's performance as a concerned caregiver was a crucial element of the deception. Her return for the medication led her to overhear voices from Victor's study, a space that was supposed to be empty, contradicting his stated alibi involving a Castellano business deal. Earlier that day, Victor had reinforced his control through a gesture of affection linked directly to her medication compliance. The voice was confirmed as his, accompanied by Marco, his head of security, an individual whose physical appearance suggests a history of violence. A standard flight response was overridden by a compulsion to investigate. The study door, a physical barrier typically secured, was ajar, providing an observation point. Through it, Victor's voice articulated the operational necessity. The timing is critical. The subject registered his vocal tone, one she previously associated with competence and found attractive. The dialogue detailed a conspiracy timed to circumvent an inheritance clause and avoid board scrutiny. Her sister Maria was assessed and dismissed as a non-threat. The legal framework for Victor to inherit all Moretti shipping assets upon Elena's death was confirmed as finalized. The subject experienced acute vertigo, a somatic response to the information, nearly betraying her presence by dropping the pill bottle. A third conspirator questioned the contingency of the subject's pregnancy during a potential autopsy. Victor then revealed the core deception. The pregnancy was a medically induced phantom condition orchestrated by Dr. Hammond using HCG injections. For 8 weeks, the subject had manifested all the requisite somatic and emotional symptoms. This revelation precipitated a total collapse of the subject's perceived reality, forcing a reevaluation of Victor's recent caregiving behaviors as calculated manipulations. Victor's performance as a devoted partner, particularly during falsified medical exams, was recalled as a key component of the gaslighting. The subject's profound emotional investment in the false pregnancy rooted in prior family trauma, had been expertly exploited. Marco then inquired about the medication's function, which Victor clarified was not merely for compliance. Its purpose was to induce passivity and a sustained mental fog through a combination of sedatives and hormones, simplifying the manipulation. When a junior associate questioned if the subject was unsuspecting, Victor's reply was saturated with contempt, identifying her credulity as her most useful quality. He profiled Elena as a classic vulnerable subject, orphaned, young, and overwhelmed by corporate responsibilities, rendering her susceptible to a savior archetype. Marco identified Victor's role-playing, to which Victor offered a narcissistic rationalization. His actions were a necessary, realistic intervention to prevent the company's collapse under her control. Victor defined the marriage as a functional transaction, then asserted his complete psychological dominance, stating, "Elena believes whatever reality I build for her." Confronted with the 2-year scope of this fabrication, the subject experienced a vasovagal response, collapsing. The pill bottle, the instrument of her chemical subjugation, was lost in the process. The termination method was then confirmed as a staged car accident, scheduled in 3 weeks, with her medicinally impaired reaction time reduced to 0 as the key factor ensuring fatality. The termination protocol was detailed: inclement weather, a hazardous turn on Starro Drive, and prearranged vehicle sabotage executed by Marco's team. The public narrative was constructed to prevent investigation. A pregnant, emotionally unstable Elena Moretti loses control of her vehicle. Victor's role would be that of the devastated widower, a media-friendly performance enabling the swift absorption of her assets into a partnership with the Castellano Group. The conspiracy, it was revealed, was initially conceived by Antonio Castellano himself. Victor reframed the subject's entire existence as the acquisition cost for a corporate merger. When his associate described the plan as cold, Victor corrected him. "It is finance," a depersonalization common among high-functioning psychopaths. The subject reacted with a suppressed physiological scream, processing the complete dehumanization. Her memories of their 2-year relationship were instantly recatalogued as a series of calculated maneuvers leading to her execution. The phantom pregnancy and the prescribed pills were recontextualized as tools of psychological warfare, designed to make her more compliant and expendable. The 3-week timeline became an object of acute focus. The next step, as outlined by Marco, was to secure Elena's signature on an updated will. Victor was confident in her compliance, noting she signed documents without review. The subject's self-awareness confirmed this, as her drug-induced cognitive deficits made her completely suggestible. Victor's methodology involved framing significant legal documents as mundane paperwork, exploiting a trust that was both absolute and pharmacologically reinforced. The subject grasped that she had been manipulated into authorizing her own homicide. Victor then confirmed contingency plans were in place, making the outcome inevitable. As this was said, Elena's fingers located the pill bottle on the floor, her hand closing around the object that had been the primary agent of her subjugation. The label identified the drug as lorazepam, prescribed for an anxiety disorder that did not exist in her medical history prior to 6 months ago. Before Victor's intervention with Dr. Hammond, her psychological state was assessed as stressed but fundamentally intact. The introduction of the chemical agent initiated a controlled cognitive and emotional decline, leading to severe depersonalization. The conspirators concluded their meeting, confident in the subject's alibi and utterly unaware of her proximity. The subject, Victor, rose, his cognitive focus shifting to Castellano agreements and logistical concerns. His withdrawal from the room triggered a pronounced psychomotor agitation in Elena, a survival response propelling her toward the service staircase. Auditory stimuli confirmed his departure directive. "Marco, bring the car. We meet Antonio at the club in 1 hour." "Understood, sir." From a position of concealment on the landing, Elena observed the dominant male figures occupying the space below. Victor's gait projected an auditory signature of dominance, reinforced by his subordinates' heavy footfalls. A percussive door closure signaled the execution of his will, followed by an engine's roar and then profound silence. Elena exhibited a ritualistic counting behavior, a self-soothing mechanism before re-engaging. Her descent was marked by significant motor impairment, a somatic response to prolonged stress. The study presented an environment saturated with Victor's olfactory markers, reinforcing his control. His desk stood as a symbol of authority, near wedding portraits displaying Elena's feigned compliance and Victor's proprietary, predatory expression. The subject fixated on fabricated narrative of the photograph before initiating a forensic examination of the desk. After 3 failed attempts on locked drawers, the 4th yielded, with inlaid documents detailing corporate entities. Moretti Shipping, Castellano Group. She arranged these artifacts of his financial conquests. Yet a file labeled EM Estate lay beneath. Upon opening it, Elena displayed acute somatic tremor. The contents detailed the methodical dismantling of her autonomy over the preceding 6 months via a new will, power of attorney, and weaponized signatures. Each signature represented a milestone in the systematic erosion of her legal standing. The final document was an unsigned will ceding her entire inheritance. An appended note specified a deadline. Get E to sign by October 15th. The current date being the 8th. A 7-day window remained for her subjugation. The subject collapsed into Victor's chair, a tactile reminder of the architect of her psychological erasure. Confronted with the documented fabrication of her reality, she recontextualized all prior intimacy as calculated performance. She began a cognitive review of past interactions, reframing them as engineered deceptions. His proposal, time to exploit her bereavement. His usurpation of her corporate role, masked by her grief. The pharmacologic intervention by Dr. Hammond, presented as therapeutic. The entire relationship was revealed as a predatory construct. In this moment of lucidity, Elena noted the cessation of her chronic psychosomatic tremor. She proceeded to the laboratory and disposed of the medication, rejecting the chemical component of her manipulation. The disposal of the pills served as a cathartic ritual, symbolizing the rejection of his plot for her eradication. Her reflection presented a subject transformed, marked by a new and stark cognitive clarity. The induced confusion dissipated, replaced by a cold awareness of her marginalized state. Though rendered a non-entity, she was not eliminated. Returning to the study, she systematically documented each component of the apparatus Victor designed for her destruction, then restored the scene precisely. Her motor control was now firm, her cognitive acuity restored. She secured the study, then ascended to the bedroom, a space shared with her predator, and prepared a single bag for flight. Its contents were strategic: untraceable currency, clothing, and a passport. She consciously discarded his jewelry, viewing the items as symbolic restraints. Credit cards were identified as surveillance tools and left behind. She retained her mother's ring, a link to her pre-trauma identity, and the prescribed vitamins, evidence of a fabricated medical condition. From the doorway, she surveyed the opulent environment of her confinement. The closet was an exhibit of his aesthetic control. The vanity, a station for the ritualized administration of substances that ensured her compliance. A surge of self-recrimination was quickly suppressed. Not again. She exited, relocating to an anonymous hotel via untraceable payment and severing communication. There, she processed the complex emotional aftermath, betrayal, rage, and the visceral fear of her near eradication. She then initiated a search for Adrian Keller, a subject known to be Victor's primary antagonist. The subject's strategy centered on leveraging Adrian Keller's known animosity toward Victor Moretti. A preliminary investigation identified Keller Maritime, a smaller but aggressive competitor. An email contact was procured from archived public data. At 2 a.m, under conditions of extreme psychological distress, Elena Moretti initiated contact. The communication was direct. Mr. Keller, my name is Elena Moretti. In 3 weeks, my husband will kill me for my company. I have the proof. If you want to see him destroyed, meet me tomorrow. I can show you all of it. E.M. She dispatched the message, preempting any regression to her previous state of learned helplessness. A period of dissociation followed as she processed the ego death of her victim persona. Keller's reply at dawn was succinct. A South Boston address and a time 2 p.m. Elena arrived preemptively. The dilapidated warehouse, a stimulus that would have previously induced fear, now registered as neutral. Clutching the printed evidence, she entered. Adrian Keller was present, awaiting her. His posture, facing away, was an initial test of dominance. Mrs. Moretti. His vocalization preceded visual acknowledgement. You are either a woman of immense courage or immense desperation. Both, Elena countered, her tone sharp. This prompted him to face her. The subject appeared to be approximately 35, with analytical eyes and the demeanor of a clinical problem solver. You said you had proof. Elena presented the file. It contains asset transfers, a statement on the fraudulent pregnancy, financials linking him to the Castellanos. He plans for my death in 3 weeks. Adrian began his review. His facial expression remained neutral, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of cold, strategic interest. Why come to me? Because you hate him, Elena stated with raw honesty. He took what was supposed to be yours, and now he is taking all that is mine. My research indicated you alone possess the motive and resources. Help you do what? His ruin. The words were delivered without affect. Take it all from him. His company, his reputation, his liberty. A proportionate response to his plan to end my life. Adrian paused. And my incentive? Moretti Shipping. Once Victor is gone, I will sell the entire company to you. Half the company's worth. The Atlantic routes you've chased for years would be yours. The proposition was framed as a balanced trade. My continued existence for the prize you've always craved. Adrian subjected her to a prolonged analytical gaze. Elena met it, masking the terror beneath a controlled exterior. He then verbalized the operational risks. This is more than a corporate takeover. The Castellanos will not watch their asset burn, I am aware. You'll have to go back to him, and you must be the perfect loving wife while we assemble our attack. Are you capable of playing that part? He questioned. Elena accessed the memory of discarding the medication, a symbol of her cognitive liberation. The compliant, suggestible persona she maintained for 2 years was no longer accessible. Yes, she affirmed. The word eraser. I am. A predator's smile formed on Adrian's face. Very well, Mrs. Moretti. We have a pact. Let the performance begin. They sealed the agreement with a handshake. Her psyche registered the probability of trading one captor for another. but she deferred the concern. The operation commenced over 3 days with alarming efficiency. Adrian's network of legal and investigative assets proved extensive. In 48 hours, they secured financial records exposing Victor's pre-existing compulsive gambling disorder. They intercepted communications with Antonio Castellano that detailed the conspiracy. Receipts for drugs used in the pregnancy fabrication were acquired. Furthermore, Dr. Hammond was identified as a fraudulent practitioner whose license was revoked, receiving cash payments from Victor for 2 years. Your husband, Adrian observed with clinical detachment, is a rank amateur. The assessment was rendered from a sterile tower, a world of glass and steel removed from the original trauma site. His pathology is defined by arrogance, Adrian clarified. He perceived you as incapable of counteraction. I was, Ilona conceded, until I became aware of the plan for my termination. That psychological state is being altered. A small case was presented. A new communication device, secure, for my contact exclusively. Your current one remains as a decoy. Vittorio must not detect this shift. Elena handled the object. But the legal document requires my signature. And he will receive it. What? We require him to maintain his delusion of absolute dominance. Any resistance now and he will detect the behavioral shift. He will alter his timeline or methodology. But your compliance will validate his triumph. It is in that state that individuals of his profile become negligent. A cold, somatic knot of fear formed in Elena's stomach. Endorsing her own death felt pathologically irrational. I understand the weight of this directive, Adrian stated, his tone shifting to pure clinical logic. We are not enabling your death, Elena. We are enabling his belief in his capacity to cause it. The distinction is critical, and should he deviate from our protocol, I contact you, she concluded. Adrian's gaze met hers. At any hour, you are no longer in isolation. This assurance should have offered solace, yet it felt like a transfer from one form of confinement to another. Nevertheless, Elena complied, perceiving no alternative path. She re-entered the mansion that night. Vittorio was in his study, focused on documents. He looked up, his features forming the practiced, affective smile she had once misinterpreted as genuine. Elena, I was becoming concerned. Maria noted you left hours ago. I required a period of disengagement, Elena stated, her voice engineered to replicate the weakness of her prior conditioned self. I needed to clear my thoughts. Are you well? Your pallor is notable. Fatigue, the pregnancy. She paused, her hand moving to her abdomen in a gesture rehearsed to autonomic reflex. I believe I will go rest. Vittorio rose, moving from his desk to place his hands on her shoulders. Elena fought a profound, visceral impulse to recoil from his touch. You have been overexerting yourself, he admonished softly. I continually advise you to rest. I know. You are correct. She forced herself to accept his embrace. The scent of his cologne, once associated with affection, now induced nausea. I apologize for my recent difficulties. You are never difficult, he kissed her hair. You are my wife. My function is to protect you. The pathological lie was a smooth, effortless stream. Elena withdrew with a fragile smile. I should take my medication. I forgot this morning. A minute signal activated in Vittorio's eyes. It may have been narcissistic gratification. I placed them on your nightstand. Ensure you take them with food. I will. Upstairs, she secured herself in the bathroom and purged until she ached. Applying water to her face, she confronted her reflection and whispered, 3 weeks. Your only objective is to survive for 3 more weeks. That day's pill was disposed of with the others. She flushed it, then descended to begin the performance of her life. The subsequent 2 weeks were a study in feigned submission. Elena produced smiles on cue. She signed the will he presented, her hand displaying a carefully engineered tremor, then observed as he filed it with an air of smug finality. She endured dinners with the Castellanos, enacting the role of the decorative spouse while Antonio and Vittorio strategized. The nights, however, were dedicated to Adrian. They were integrating data, structuring the legal offensive, and mapping every associate in Vittorio's corrupt network. Adrian's legal team prepared injunctions to neutralize Vittorio's empire upon Elena's command. Timing is the critical variable, Adrian stressed in a late session. Act prematurely, and he will mire this in litigation for a decade. Act too late, you will be dead. We must execute at one perfect moment. And when is that? The instant he achieves absolute certainty of his victory, the moment his defenses are completely lowered. Elena recognized the strategy's cruel logic. It was a mirror of Vittorio's own methodology. Induce a false sense of security in your target, then attack their primary vulnerability. She was learning the perpetrator's techniques. The thought should have been repellent. Instead, it felt like a reclamation of agency. There is another matter, Adrian said one evening, a week before the planned incident. They were in his office, the city lights a fractured gem field below. Something you must accept. What is it? When this concludes, when Vittorio is removed and you regain your company, you will not be the one to lead it. Elena tensed. What are you saying? You are 24, you lack the experience and training. The board's allegiance is to Vittorio's power structure. Remove him and they will behave as predators, with you as the target. And the alternative? I cede my inheritance to you? That was the arrangement we made. The arrangement was a sale, not a complete abdication. Adrian's posture changed as he observed her. You have transformed since our first meeting. There is a hardness in you now. I ceased the medication that rendered me a ghost. This is the underlying self. It is more than that. He moved to the window, a dark form. You now possess a rage, a functional tool if it does not consume you. Moretti shipping requires a true leader, and that is not you, not at present. The words landed with the impact of truth. For 2 years, Elena had been a legal instrument, an heiress whose function was to provide a signature. The logistics of a global enterprise were unknown to her, but unknowns could be learned. Later, she stated, after Vittorio is gone, I will learn. A peculiar expression crossed Adrian's face that disturbed her. As you wish. They resumed planning, but the topic remained. It was a vile psychological pattern, realizing that removing Vittorio merely meant installing a new controller, but survival was the primary objective. Also, the final evening, sleep was unattainable. Lying beside Vittorio, she registered his breathing and envisioned him performing false grief at her funeral. At 3 a.m, she exited the bed into the home's oppressive silence. In the kitchen's low light, she observed her mother's garden, now a neglected plot. The secure phone illuminated. Are you prepared for tomorrow? Adrian's text manifested. As prepared as I can be, she replied. Remember, the dynamic has inverted. He believes he is the predator, unaware you constructed the trap. She set the phone down and went back to the bed. As she lay down, Vittorio stirred. You cannot sleep. No. Elena injected a tremor into her voice, a final performance of anxiety. I am having terrible nightmares. About what? About dying. Vittorio's arms surrounded her. She felt the imagined pressure of his lips against her hair. You are not going to die, Elena, I promise you. A deception so rehearsed, so pathologically perfect. Elena closed her eyes, counting the seconds until the grim performance concluded. Dawn arrived with a cruel, abrupt light. As Elena's eyes opened, Vittorio was already dressed, adjusting his silk tie as his reflection observed him. He met her gaze and presented the counterfeit smile she now despised. A critical day, he stated. Finalizing the Castellano agreements. I should be finished by 6, then a quiet dinner, just us. That sounds wonderful, Elena responded, her voice a fragile act as she sat up. I have my medical appointment. Hammond at 2, he confirmed. The fabricated checkup. Vittorio stooped, placing a cold kiss on her forehead. Contact me afterward. I must know that you and our child are well, Dessa. The non-existent child, the appointment that would not occur, a stage for his narrative. Elena simply nodded, her senses tracking his departing footsteps, the door's final sound and his engine's receding noise. She then retrieved the encrypted phone. Adrian's voice was immediate, sharp. Has he departed? Yes, he is convinced I have a doctor's appointment at 2 o'clock. Perfect. The afternoon is ours. Marco is on him. The moment he meets the mechanic, we will possess the final component. Elena's knuckles were white against the phone's dark housing. And if this plan fails, it will not. Trust the protocol. Faith was a resource she no longer had, but all other options were exhausted. She dressed and drove to an address Adrian supplied. Not his secure office, but a sterile law firm. A neutral space with cameras and witnesses. Adrian was there with 2 individuals. A woman in her 50s with an analytical gaze, and a younger man whose focus seemed confined to his screen. Elena, this is Margaret Chen, my lead counsel. Paul Reeves, our forensic accountant. Adrian gestured to the chairs at a stark conference table, the command center for their impending operation. As Elena took her seat, a conflict of internal fear warred with her composed presentation. Margaret spoke first. Our case against Vittorio is conclusive. We have evidence of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. The evidence was absolute, she explained, but their strategy had to be precise. Meaning what, exactly? It meant they would circumvent the judicial system. Vittorio's network was too extensive. The Castellanos were an institution. The legal system would become a labyrinth where proof could be made to disappear. Then what is the strategy? Paul rotated his laptop, directing the screen toward Elena. A complex pattern of financial malfeasance materialized on the screen. We disseminate this, he specified, not to law enforcement, but directly to Moretti Shipping's board. This represented their clinical gambit, to dismantle Victor in the sole arena he respected, the estimation of his contemporaries. The objective was to neutralize his credibility before he could mount a psychological defense. And the subsequent phase? Margaret's tone was stark. He will be in subject with no remaining assets to protect. This elevates his danger profile, necessitating your placement in a secure facility. Elena interrupted. Negative. I will be present. I require observation of his vase at the moment he processes my role in his deconstruction. Adrian uttered her name. Elena. She maintained his gaze, her voice exhibiting the properties of sharpened steel. I will be present. He attempted to seize my assets and terminate my life. I will not be sequestered while surrogates prosecute this conflict." A profound stillness descended on the room. Margaret and Paul exchanged a look. Adrian's affect was completely neutral. "Acknowledged," he conceded at last. "Your presence is approved, but you will adhere to our protocol with absolute fidelity. No deviations. At the first sign of instability, you are extracted. Is that understood?" "It is understood." Margaret advanced another file across the table. "The operational timeline. We have initiated an emergency board meeting for the coming week, requested by you as primary shareholder. Victor remains unaware." "How did you manage?" "I compelled the meeting," Adrian interjected, "utilizing proxy votes I've been systematically acquiring for the last 6 months. Sourced from minor shareholders whose confidence in Victor had begun to erode. Insufficient for a hostile acquisition, but adequate to mandate a formal assembly." Elena remained motionless, the sheer scope of his strategic planning becoming manifest. "You've been orchestrating this for 6 months?" "This contingency has been in development since your husband appropriated my holdings," Adrian stated, his tone devoid of warmth. "Your predicament merely provided the ideal catalyst." So this was the clinical reality, not a rescue operation, a corporate seizure. Adrian's vengeance was a primed weapon, and Elena was its delivery system, a hypothesis she had long considered valid. "And the protocol for tonight?" she inquired. "Victor anticipates a vehicular malfunction. Let him," Paul replied, displaying a low-resolution traffic feed. "We have Marco under constant surveillance. The instant he engages the mechanic contracted for the vehicle sabotage, we will document everything. You will not use your car tonight. You will use ours. If Victor inquires, you reported feeling unwell, a credible pretext given the pregnancy. He will register an anomaly. Perhaps, but his pronounced arrogance is his critical vulnerability. A 24-hour delay will not derail his agenda, he will simply recalibrate." Elena attempted to internalize this, that Victor's own pathological self-regard would precipitate his downfall, but she had once placed her trust in him, and the memory of that miscalculation remained an acute trauma. They dedicated another hour to analyzing all potential scenarios and countermeasures. Upon her departure, a painful pressure initiated behind her eyes and a tremor reactivated in her hands. It was not a pharmaceutical side effect, but the somatic expression of the immense stress to come. She returned to her residence, but remained in the vehicle, unable to compel herself to enter. The house now stood as a monument to her flawed judgments. Each space contained a poisoned memory. The kitchen, where he performed false euphoria over their non-existent child. The bedroom, the setting for his elaborate deceptions. The study, the command center from which he planned her termination. Upstairs, she changed her attire and assumed a waiting posture. At 6:30, she detected his automobile. She registered the door, the familiar cadence of his footsteps as he moved through the residence to locate her. She remained immobile in the bedroom, a dark silhouette against the window, her gaze unfocused. "Elena?" His form occupied the doorway. "Are you all right?" "Merely fatigued." She did not alter her focus. The medical examination was protracted. "Is our child developing normally?" "Dr. Hammond reports no complications. I just require rest." She could sense the dissipation of tension from his body, followed by his approach, his hand making contact with her shoulder. "Good. I experience concern." The fabrication was as reflexive to him as respiration. Elena pivoted, met his gaze, and induced tears. I love you. You are aware of that, are you not? Victor's expression softened, or perhaps it was simply another meticulously crafted mask being deployed. I am aware, and I love you. He enveloped her in an embrace, and Elena closed her eyes, visualizing his ruin with precise clarity. I feel it would be inadvisable for me to drive tonight, she murmured, her voice muted by his suit. Could we arrange for food delivery? Of course, whatever you require. It was a perfect execution, exactly as Paul had projected. They consumed Thai food while a film played, its visuals a meaningless sensory input. Victor's gaze repeatedly shifted to his phone, awaiting confirmation from Marco that her vehicle was prepared to be her tomb. But the signal he anticipated would not be transmitted. Because Marco was under observation, every action logged and archived. Every text message, every communication, every behavior served as another component in the construct of Victor's downfall. At 10 o'clock, Elena produced a well-acted yawn. I believe I will retire for the evening. I will be up shortly. I have a few emails to dispatch. She proceeded to the bedroom and secured the door, then retrieved the burner phone. Her message was a single word. Status. The response was immediate. Marco established contact at 4:47 this afternoon. Mechanic verifies receipt of payment. We possess video, audio, and a financial record. The entrapment is complete. Elena sat on the bed, the text illuminating the dark room. The entrapment is complete. She possessed it. Irrefutable data proving Victor had contracted her death. She anticipated a wave of relief. Instead, she experienced only a profound, systemic coldness. Board meeting is Friday. Another text from Adrian appeared on the display. 3 days? Can you maintain the deception for that duration? 3 additional days of this performance. 3 more nights proximate to a man who desired her death. 3 days enacting a role she had perfected over 2 years. Yes, she transmitted back. 3 days is a negligible period. Good. Obtain some rest. It will be necessary. Elena placed the phone aside and positioned herself under the covers. An hour elapsed before Victor entered. His arm settled across her waist, a habitual gesture, drawing her close in a simulation of affection. Elena remained awake in the darkness, her eyes fixed on the void, counting down the minutes until Friday. For the subsequent 3 days, time itself seemed to adopt an uncanny, suspended quality. Elena navigated the house like an apparition, executing her role with a detached, perfect precision. She reciprocated Victor's smiles. She consumed the meals he prepared. She ingested the placebo prenatal medication and simulated sleep whenever he was present. Each night after his respiration settled into a deep, rhythmic pattern, she conferred with Adrian's operatives. They rehearsed her statement to the board, refining her delivery, her cadence, and the exact moment to introduce the evidence designed to shatter her husband. Margaret's directive was to remain dispassionate, to let strategic thinking override all emotional response. He will react with aggression, Margaret cautioned. The outburst will be severe. He will characterize you as psychologically unstable, using some medication as his evidence. You must be emotionally prepared for this. I am prepared. Are you certain? Adrian's voice intervened. Once you enter that room, the action is irreversible. Victor will know of your betrayal. The Castellanos will know. You are designating yourself as a target that will persist long after this concludes, regardless of the outcome. Elena held his stare. I am already a target. The distinction is Now I am the one holding the weapon. A shift registered in Adrian's eyes, a flicker of professional respect, or possibly the acknowledgement of a similar psychological profile. In that case, you had better not miss, he advised. Victor returned late on Thursday evening. He discovered Elena in his study, seated at his desk, reviewing the corporate files he had left accessible. She had been using her nights to reassimilate the specifics of the empire her father had constructed, the one she had neglected in a state of medicated dissociation. Elena? He was positioned in the doorway, clearly nonplussed. What are you occupied with? Reading, she stated, her response immediate. I have come to realize my profound ignorance regarding this company. It is time for that to be rectified. Victor entered the study with caution, as one might approach a volatile, unpredictable subject. You should be resting. The baby's condition is optimal, and I am tired of being non-functional, Elena retorted, gathering the documents. My father dedicated his life to this enterprise. The very least I can do is comprehend it. For a moment, an unfiltered expression of suspicion crossed his face before he constructed a smile. Of course, that is excellent. I can assist you with the more complex sections. That will not be required. I prefer to conduct this analysis independently. She moved past him, the files held against her chest, sensing his gaze on her back as she ascended the stairs. That night, sleep did not come for Victor. Elena felt him beside her, acutely awake, his mind processing, attempting to resolve this abrupt, disquieting variable in his plan. Let him grapple with it, she mused. Let him experience the same anxiety he administered to me. Friday arrived under a severe slate-colored sky. Elena attired herself in one of her mother's Navy business suits, the final artifact of her former identity she had retrieved from the pharmaceutical haze. Her hair was styled up, her cosmetics were subdued, and she wore pearl earrings like small, hard data points. She was presenting as an heiress today, not an ornamental partner. Victor was waiting downstairs. He observed her descent, a deep furrow in his brow. You're dressed for a corporate setting. Are you going somewhere? A meeting with the board, she declared, her tone frigid as she poured her coffee. The subject, Elena, initiated a destabilizing maneuver with a query about an emergency board meeting. Victor's response was a terse denial, betraying his loss of informational control. She maintained a clinical calm, attributing the meeting to shareholder concerns relayed by Margaret Chen. The name, Adrian Keller's counsel, visibly triggered Victor's anxiety, manifesting as a jaw tick. He attempted to mask his panic, turning away to make a frantic call as Elena calmly prepared to leave. Victor attempted to reassert physical dominance, his hand seizing Elena's arm in a proprietary grip. I'm coming with you. Her dismissal of his presence was met with a non-negotiable, I'm going. The pressure promised contusion. Elena's gaze shifted to his face, where she made a clear diagnosis, not performance, but raw, unfiltered terror. Her acquiescence. Fine. We'll go together, was a tactical concession. The drive was a study in repressed hostility. His knuckles were white on the wheel while she observed the rain-swept city. The Moretti shipping building loomed, a monument to her father and the site of her previous disempowerment. The boardroom environment was saturated with tension, occupied by board members who had known her since childhood. The predator, Antonio Castellano, presided. Adrian Keller was a silhouette against the storm, his head turned at Elena's entrance, their gazes connecting for a moment. She moved to the head of the table, to her father's chair, and witnessed Victor's composure shatter as his reality fractured. Margaret Chen stood. This meeting was requested by Elena Moretti, the majority shareholder and rightful CEO, to address grave concerns about corporate governance. Victor shot to his feet. This is a farce. Elena isn't in any condition to— I am in precisely the right condition, Elena's voice incised his. This is my company, my father's legacy, and I have proof you have systematically bled it dry for the last 2 years. Chaos erupted. Voices clashed. Antonio Castellanos' expression darkened, and Victor roared, "This is insane! Elena, you're sick! The stress of the pregnancy." "There is no pregnancy." A final silence fell. Elena stood, opened a file, and began disseminating papers across the table. "Victor has been paying a disgraced doctor to inject me with hormones that fake pregnancy symptoms. His plan was to make me seem unstable, easier to control, and eventually easier to get rid of." "That's a monstrous lie." Victor's voice was like stone. "Elena is taking prescribed anxiety medication. Dr. Stephen Hammond lost his license in New York 3 years ago for prescription fraud," Margaret stated. "We have proof of cash payments from Victor Moretti to him, starting the month after their wedding. We also have a recording of Victor planning his wife's murder to get her inheritance." She activated a device, and Victor's voice filled the room. "A car accident. She's on those pills. Her reflexes are slow. A rainy night. Needs a small mechanical failure." Elena observed the blood drain from her husband's face. The pregnant, unstable Elena Moretti spins out of control. A tragedy. Antonio Castellano was on his feet. "Where did you get this?" "Straight from the source," Adrian said from the window. "In his own study, plotting a murder like a business deal." Victor's facade crumbled completely. He whirled on Elena, the monster breaking free. "You recorded me? You set me up? You were going to have me killed." Elena's voice was quiet, but her words were a clinical indictment. "You faked a child, you drugged me, and you planned to murder me, so yes, I recorded you. Now everyone knows who you are." "You have no idea what you've just done," Victor seethed, his hands shaking with rage. "The Castellano merger is built on fraud and attempted murder," Margaret interjected. "That makes it void. It also opens every party to conspiracy charges." Antonia's eyes narrowed. "This is a setup. Keller planned this." "I didn't have to plan anything," Adrian replied. "Victor gave me everything I needed the moment he chose murder over divorce. I'm just here to watch the fire." The room imploded. The board screamed, Antonio and Victor panicked, and Margaret calmly distributed more proof. Bank statements, emails, transfer confirmations. In the eye of the storm, Elena sat at the head of the table, observing her husband's world incinerate. Security was called to remove Victor, who was still yelling, still fabricating. Antonio Castellano vanished, phone to his ear. The board members filed out, shocked into silence, none meeting Elena's eyes until only she, Adrian, and Margaret remained. "That went roughly as planned," Margaret remarked, her briefcase latch echoing. Post-adrenal tremors began in Elena's hands. "What comes next?" she asked. "An investigation, fraud, attempted murder. The proof is overwhelming. He'll likely take a deal." "And the company?" "It belongs to you again. Total control starting now. The board's position is legally baseless." Elena nodded slowly. Her company, her father's life's work. The triumph tasted like ash. After Margaret left, Adrian remained at the window, resuming his vigil over the city. "You held yourself together," he noted. I wasn't sure you had the steel for it. I wasn't either. But you did. Now your goal is achieved. Elena observed him, saw the quiet victory in his eyes, and a chill settled deep in her bones. What do you want, Adrian? He turned. The same terms, Moretti shipping for 50 cents on the dollar. And if I say no, you'll be in charge of a business you can't run, with directors who despise you, surrounded by enemies. Victor had influential friends, Elena. They have long memories. So I just give it up. You will sell it for a considerable price. In return, I'll provide the guidance and security you'll need for the storm ahead. A nerve in Elena's jaw tightened. You planned all of this. This was never a rescue. It was a corporate raid. It was both, Adrian answered, closing the distance. You were sinking, you still are. This isn't the end, Elena. It was just the first move. And if I want to make my own moves, you will lose. He said it factually, without cruelty. You're smart, you can be brutal, but you are not ready for this world by yourself. The words struck her. She had ruined Victor, but only with Adrian's weapons. Alone, she'd have been a drugged, ghost-like wife headed for an early grave. But she was a very fast learner. I have to think, she said. A faint smirk touched his lips. That's all I'm asking. He left her, a monarch on an empty throne, holding a salvaged inheritance and a void future. Elena stared at the relentless rain, wondering if she'd merely swapped one prison for another. The house she'd shared with Victor was poisoned. Instead, she found a room in a city hotel, a nameless tower where money bought silence. She sat on the bed, still in her mother's suit, her gaze fixed on her phone. The phone's screen was an inferno. 17 calls from Victor, 12 from blocked numbers, and 3 from her sister, Maria. In the chaos, she'd forgotten. She called back. Elena, thank God! Maria's voice was sharp with fear. I've been calling for hours. What is going on? A reporter had found her, asking about Victor and fraud. It's complicated. Complicated? Elena, they're saying your husband tried to kill you. Elena shut her eyes, the raw truth hitting her again. He did. A deep quiet fell. Then gently, I'm on my way. Where are you? Maria, I am okay. Where are you? Defeated, Elena texted her the location. 20 minutes later, a desperate hammering erupted at the door. It was Maria. She possessed the same dark hair, the same perceptive eyes that absorbed every detail. Maria assessed her sister's condition instantly, embracing her with a painful tightness. You were to inform me, Maria whispered, the moment you knew. I couldn't determine who was safe. I am. You trust me. Maria pulled back, her grip firm on Elena's shoulders. Always. Is that understood? Elena affirmed, the psychic armor she had maintained for weeks beginning to fracture. With Maria present, the vulnerability became permissible. So she recounted it all. The concealed office, the audio file, the fabricated pregnancy, the sedatives, Adrian's ambiguous assistance, the final confrontation, and the expression in Victor's eyes as his world was incinerated. Maria processed the entire narrative without speaking, her expression hardening. That creature, she hissed once Elena concluded. I will handle him. He is in state custody. Margaret believes the charges are secure. And this man, Adrian Keller, is he trustworthy? Elena hesitated. He serves a purpose. That was not my question. No, she conceded, he isn't, but he provided aid when no one else did. Maria's jaw tightened. And what is his fee? The corporation. He intends to acquire Moretti Shipping. Under no circumstances. Elena, that enterprise is our father's legacy. It belongs to us. You did not endure that monster, only to surrender it to another man who views you as a game piece. I lack the knowledge to operate it. On that matter, Victor was correct. Then you will acquire the knowledge, Maria retorted, seizing Elena's hands. You are 24 years old, not deceased. You are capable of learning, and I am here. I am ignorant of shipping, but I understand commerce, and I recognize a predator. Elena yearned to accept her words, to believe she could prevail without Adrian's shield, without exchanging one controller for another. But uncertainty persisted, a quiet voice suggesting she was profoundly outmatched. Remain with me tonight, she requested instead. I wish not to be alone, Maria consented. I am remaining right here. They had room service bring flavorless pasta and inexpensive wine they scarcely registered. For a brief time, Elena was permitted to be the younger sister again. Not a widow, not a chief executive officer, not the architect of her husband's downfall, merely Elena. By 12 a.m., Maria was asleep in the adjacent bed. Elena remained awake, gazing at the ceiling, mapping her subsequent actions. Her untraceable phone vibrated. It was a message from Adrian. A discussion is necessary. My office, 10 a.m. tomorrow. Elena observed the message for a considerable time before typing a single response. Confirmed. Sleep did not materialize. At dawn, the narrative detonated. Her personal phone was inundated with alerts from news syndicates, social media, and figures from her past. It was ubiquitous. Heiress uncovers husband's murder plot. Boston executive detained for fraud, attempted murder. The Moretti Union, a lethal deception. The audio recording had been disseminated. Not in its entirety, only the most damning segments. Victor's detached, methodical voice plotting her demise as if it were a line item. Elena was on the bathroom floor, navigating the reports, her private horror now a public exhibition. Are you all right? Maria stood at the doorway holding a coffee. They're describing me as courageous, Elena stated, her tone devoid of emotion. Heroic? A survivor? As if I were given an option. You were given an option. You could have fled. You opted to fight. I opted for retribution. At times, they are indistinguishable. Maria handed her the coffee. What time is your meeting with Keller? 10. I will be accompanying you. That is not a point for discussion. You will not confront that shark by yourself. Elena was too depleted to resist. She bathed, donned the fresh clothes Maria had provided, and allowed her sister to guide her into the predator's territory. The office was exactly as she recalled, sterile, contemporary, and engineered to make one feel insignificant. Adrian was waiting inside a conference room with Margaret and an unknown party, an older man near 60, whose expression suggested he had witnessed everything and was impressed by nothing. Elena, and you must be Maria, Adrian stated, rising to extend a hand. Maria disregarded it. Dispense with formalities. State your objective. Adrian's smile was unsettling. Forthright. I approve. This is James Rutherford, the retired Chief Executive Officer of Atlantic Maritime. He has consented to serve as a consultant on the transition. What transition? Maria's tone was sharp as a knife. The acquisition of Moretti Shipping by Keller Maritime, as per my arrangement with Elena. Elena is not selling. Adrian's attention shifted to Elena. Is that accurate? Elena's gaze moved from her sister to Adrian to the individual designated to liquidate her father's life's work. My decision is not yet made, she said, her voice steady. I require additional time. Time is a resource you lack, Adrian's voice sharpened. The narrative is public. The media is investigating your company. Your board is in disarray. Your investors are panicked. You required stability as of yesterday. What I require, Elena answered quietly, is to comprehend the precise nature of my loss. Margaret's voice sliced through the tension. Moretti Shipping holds a current valuation near $200 million. As was agreed, Adrian's offer is $100 million, precisely 50%. Maria's comeback was biting. $100 million she is discarding, Adrian retorted, his tone frigid. $100 million that finances her continued existence. Victor would have murdered her without my intervention. This is the cost of living. It is extortion. It is commerce. Elena was on her feet. I must see it. The company. I have to understand what I am relinquishing. Adrian's brow creased. You have been to the headquarters. I have been to a boardroom. I have attended meetings where men spoke past me. I have not witnessed the operation, the vessels, the routes, the men who sustain it all. I must witness all of it before I consent to anything. That process could require weeks. Then it will require weeks, Elena replied, her eyes fixed upon his. You claimed I was incapable of managing this company. You may be correct. But I will not sign away my inheritance without first understanding its substance. A profound quiet settled over the room. Margaret's gaze shifted to Adrian. Maria observed Elena with a trace of pride in her features. Adrian leaned back, appraising Elena as if she were a new, unpredictable factor in his calculations. 1 week, he declared at last. You will have 1 week to observe the operation, meet the personnel, and learn the fundamentals. Following that, we will finalize this agreement. 2 weeks. 1 week, Elena. Accept it or decline it. Elena resisted the impulse to argue, recognizing the firm boundary he had established. Adrian's display of patience had been a performance, and the act had just concluded. 1 week, she conceded. Adrian stood. James will manage the coordination. He has an intimate knowledge of the business. Utilize him. Absorb quickly. The meeting concluded in a haze of handshakes she scarcely registered and commitments she was uncertain she could honor. On the drive back, Maria's knuckles were white on the wheel. You are giving it actual consideration, she finally said. Selling. I am considering not being a complete fool. Adrian is correct. I am ignorant of the first thing about this. Then learn. You have just secured yourself time to do so. A week is insufficient time to learn an empire. No, but it is sufficient time to determine if you wish to. Elena only watched as the city's lights blurred past the window. In another part of Boston, Victor was languishing in a jail cell, surely engineering his escape. Elsewhere, the Castellanos were managing the fallout, and everywhere her name was being spoken. The blameless wife who had ensnared her husband, the lost heiress who had seized her throne. Except she hadn't, not truly. She had merely traded Victor's enclosure for Adrian's tether, and now she had to devise a way to sever both. The tour commenced at 7 the following morning. James Rutherford appeared in a vehicle that seemed older than she was and was likely valued higher than her residence. He was a man of minimal words, a characteristic for which she was profoundly grateful. The inspection of her birthright started at the shipyard south of the city, the operational core of the Moretti fleet. She had never been to this place. Victor, that serpent, had consistently concocted some narrative about it being overly hazardous, too grimy for a woman. She understood the reality now. It was just another barrier he had erected to separate her from her own power. The site was a behemoth, a battlefield of cranes, cargo containers, and massive vessels in various states of deconstruction and maintenance. The atmosphere was dense with salt, diesel fuel, and corrosion. Men in hard hats operated with military precision, their calls piercing the mechanical clamor. James simply gave her a hard hat and a safety vest. Your father visited here weekly. He knew a majority of these men by their first names. Elena fastened the vest, feeling like a performer assuming a role in her own biography. I have no memory of that. You were only a child, but they have memory of him, and they have memory of you. They began the tour, with James reciting dispassionate data on tonnage, shipping corridors, and maintenance timetables. Elena attempted to process it, but the terminology was an unfamiliar dialect, a cipher Victor had ensured she could never solve. A foreman whose face was etched by time and weather approached. Ms. Moretti, this is an honor. Thank you. I apologize. I cannot recall. Dan Callahan, I was with your father for 20 years. His gaze went to James, then returned to her. We learned about your husband, what he attempted to execute. My sympathies for what you endured. Thank you. Your father would be exceptionally proud of how you managed that viper. That required true courage. A knot formed in Elena's throat. I am not certain about that. I am. Enzo Moretti founded this enterprise on pure nerve and resilience. It seems you inherited a double portion of both. Dan departed before Elena could formulate a reply. Encircled by the concrete and steel dominion her father had constructed, she felt its colossal weight bear down upon her. He is not incorrect, James said softly. Enzo was the most obstinate man alive. He declined to sell even when the market collapsed in 2008. He said Moretti Shipping could withstand anything. And did it? By the narrowest of margins. He leveraged every cent he possessed, burying himself in debt. The subject's familial enterprise, a patriarchal legacy, faces hostile acquisition by Adrian Keller. An advisor presented the diagnosis. Keller, a long-term opportunistic predator, was triggered by the subject's separation from her narcissistic partner, Victor. His strategy projects as a destructive asset-stripping protocol. Resistance would provoke systemic attack from a board still under Victor's thrall and from the hostile Castellano family, isolating the subject within her own power structure. The subject's perception was one of entrapment, but her associate attempted a cognitive reframing, positing her as a curative agent, not a victim. The diagnosis, Victor's pathology, a narcissistic depersonalization of the workforce, was the corporate ailment. Her antithetical nature was presented as the primary therapeutic tool. The subject's expression of low self-efficacy was countered with the developmental psychology argument. Her re-education commenced with immediate immersion into the organization's core operations. By evening, the subject exhibited symptoms of cognitive overload, yet a nascent intellectual curiosity emerged. Her quarters were converted into a strategic operations center for analyzing Moretti Shipping's corporate structure. This period of intense, self-directed study indicated a hyper-focused state, overriding physiological exhaustion. A confidant, Maria, observed the subject in a state of total absorption at 2 a.m. A 4-day timeline remained for her to select between a risk-averse flight response and a high-conflict engagement. The associate, Maria, probed for the subject's instinctual response. Elena's verbalization of terror was met not with placation, but with validation. Fear was framed as rational threat assessment. Evidence of institutional decay was clear in third-quarter reports, a direct consequence of Victor's pathological neglect. To counter the subject's recurring self-doubt, Maria initiated a collaborative pact. Functioning as a data analyst, Maria began converting complex financial stimuli into coherent strategic intelligence. Daylight revealed the depth of the corporate necrosis, a state attributed to Victor's destructive influence. Maria's prognosis was stark. Recovery necessitated conflict, not negotiation. The board was deemed functionally paralyzed by fear-based loyalty. Maria thus proposed a radical purge of the existing leadership. The subject cited her 2-year period of spousal objectification to argue her incompetence. Maria countered by sharing case histories of overcoming institutional misogyny and ageism, offering a model of resistance. Maria's inquiry served as a mirror for the subject's own decision-making process. The offer was not for employment, but for a strategic alliance contingent upon Elena's commitment. For Maria, this represented a more psychologically compelling conflict. This interaction appeared to alleviate the subject's profound sense of isolation. Verbal confirmation of the alliance, "I'm with you," was ritualized with a handshake, symbolizing the formation of a unified front and the initial mobilization for conflict. The subsequent days comprised an accelerated indoctrination into adversarial corporate dynamics. Under James's guidance, she profiled key personnel, identifying their loyalties. The human assets were categorized as loyal, ambivalent, or hostile remnants of Victor's regime. The subject began a clinical power analysis, differentiating viable assets from compromised ones. On the 4th day, supported by her allies, she confronted legal counsel to quantify the full spectrum of Victor's pathological mismanagement. Legal assessment indicated the Castellano contract was void, with litigation for breach imminent. The opponent's objective was identified as financial attrition designed to bankrupt the company. Submission was quantified at $10 to $15 million plus punitive conditions. The subject perceived this as criminal coercion. Counsel viewed it as transactional. Maria then proposed a high-risk third option, exposing the Castellanos' complicity in Victor's felonies, altering the room's emotional climate. Counsel classified this strategy as extremely hazardous, predicting extra-legal retaliation from the Castellanos. The subject was presented with a binary choice: capitulation to a criminal entity or total systemic collapse. This moment appeared to trigger an acute awareness of command responsibility. The $100 million offer from Adrian reemerged as a potent psychological escape route, an option for conflict avoidance. However, cognitive triggers, paternal legacy, loyalty archetypes, and the image of her narcissistic abuser overrode the impulse for avoidance. "We will fight," she stated, demonstrating a significant shift in persona. This declaration was an overt rejection of Victor's behavioral patterns. Overruling counsel, she established non-negotiable terms of zero financial concession. An associate, Margaret, displayed a subtle expression consistent with vicarious predatory satisfaction. Compliance was noted, and conflict protocols were initiated. Maria's retrospective analysis labeled the subject's choice as a display of either extreme bravery or profound folly, yet consistent with the paternal archetype. During the meeting with Adrian, the subject confessed her operational deficiencies. This was not an admission of weakness, but a strategic statement of intent to acquire necessary skills. Adrian's facial expression remained unreadable, a classic tactic of emotional containment. "The error, if it is one, is my prerogative," she countered. Adrian highlighted her lack of experience, 1 week versus 40 years. She reframed the issue as one of volition versus history, signaling a non-negotiable stance. Having already experienced total loss, the threat held diminished psychological impact. Adrian appeared to identify her father's behavioral rigidity in her, a trait he diagnosed as a dangerous maladaptive pattern that had previously threatened the organization. Adrian asserted her father, Enzo, functioned on instinct, a near-fatal behavioral flaw. Yet he endured, she noted. Adrian dismissed mere survival as an untenable goal for her. You need immediate tactical advantage. Her response, then instruct me, reframed the entire dynamic. She acknowledged her precarious state but refused the acquisition. Instead, she proposed an alliance intending to weaponize his knowledge of the company for her own strategic benefit. A recovery protocol is required. Your compensation, a 20% share, a silent partner. If we succeed, you gain financially. If we fail, you retain the devalued assets. Adrian entered a state of intense cognitive assessment, calculating probabilities and searching for deception. This deviates from our agreement, he stated. Correct. The variables have shifted, as have I. This new paradigm is more mutually beneficial. Explain. An immediate purchase secures a damaged entity with a hostile workforce. Aided reconstruction produces a more valuable asset. Furthermore, it facilitates a punitive action against Victor. You can observe his incarceration while knowing his former spouse not only survived, but prospered. A micro-expression of satisfaction appeared on Adrian's face. Your learning curve is steep. Do we have an agreement? It merits consideration. I require time for analysis. You have until dawn. After that, I proceed autonomously. The subject disengaged, masking significant physiological stress indicators. She had gambled her future on a newly constructed identity. Adrian initiated contact the next morning. 25%, he proposed directly, and a seat on the board. Despite physiological arousal, her vocal tone remained controlled. 20%, and you can attend meetings as an observer with no voting rights. 23, with advisory capacity on major financial moves. 22, advisory only in your hours defined by contract. A brief pause was followed by a quiet, authentic laugh from Adrian. You have rehearsed. Maria was my coach. So are we in business? We are in business. I will have Margaret draft the revised agreement. Elena terminated the call, allowing herself 10 seconds for emotional processing before resuming her duties. The initial month presented as a relentless conditioning through sustained conflict. Subject Elena occupied her father's former office within the Moretti shipping facility, the corner suite overlooking the docks. However, the psychological residue of Victor was pervasive. His accolades, his ostentatious writing instruments, a wedding photograph that induced a visceral negative reaction. She initiated a total environmental purge. Every artifact associated with him was sequestered and removed by security personnel as if it were biohazardous material. She then repopulated the void with her own psychological anchors, her mother's seascape painting, her father's antique compass, and a large whiteboard that transformed the office into a center for strategic operations. Maria established a workspace in the adjacent office, commencing a forensic examination of the corporate ledgers. Within a week, she unearthed 3 clandestine accounts Victor employed to embezzle funds via shell corporations linked to the Castellanos. His siphoning reached nearly $2 million last year, Maria reported, placing a dossier on Elena's desk. Is it traceable? Can charges be filed? Forward it to Margaret. Add it to his list of transgressions. Acknowledged. But Elena? This action will further antagonize the Castellanos. They will interpret this as a declaration of hostilities. Excellent. Let them. Perhaps it will induce operational errors. Maria's expression conveyed significant apprehension, but she offered no further dissent. She recognized the futility of debating Elena once a decision had been solidified. James Rutherford visited twice weekly, providing intensive instruction on the core logistics of the shipping industry. He educated her in interpreting manifests, negotiating with port authorities, and distinguishing profitable routes from financial liabilities. Your acquisition of this data is proceeding far more rapidly than I anticipated, he remarked one afternoon, assessing her progress. Is that a commendation? It is an observation. The majority of individuals require months for this. You've assimilated the fundamentals in a few weeks. The fundamentals are insufficient. Indeed, but they are a prerequisite. James produced another file. We must address your board of directors' dilemma. Elena had been actively avoiding this issue. Of the 12 members, no fewer than 6 were engaged in undermining her authority. They attended meetings only to systematically oppose her proposals, subsequently feeding narratives to journalists about her mismanagement of her father's enterprise. I cannot simply dismiss them, she stated, not without documented cause. You don't dismiss them, you strategically outmaneuver them. How? James indicated the corporate bylaws she had neglected, the same regulations Victor had manipulated to usurp control. Embedded within were protocols for appointing new members, convening emergency votes, and expelling any director implicated in corrupt activities. 3 of them are already compromised, James explained. They have accepted bribes from rival firms, a severe policy violation, substantiate it, present it to the board, and offer them a choice: resign or be subjected to a full investigation. And the others? Present them with an ultimatum: align with the new strategic direction or remove themselves as the company recovers. Once your competence is demonstrated, most will conform. The rest will become obsolete. Elena examined the list of names. Men with established ties to her father who had observed her development, yet who perceived a juvenile occupying a position of power. I want them removed, she declared. Every single one. Anyone who remained passive while Victor drained this company's resources. That constitutes half your board. Then I will construct a new one. I require individuals who are invested in this company, not merely their own professional advancement. Who are you considering? Elena had prepared her own roster, a project she had been developing for weeks. Dan Callahan from the docks, 2 captains in whom James had confidence, a supply chain specialist identified by Maria, and a consultant in sustainable shipping. None of these candidates possess conventional board experience, James observed. Neither do I. But they understand this industry and are committed to its personnel. That is the enterprise my father established. That is what I am restoring. James regarded her for a prolonged, silent interval. You know, when you initially requested my assistance, I projected you would last 3 weeks before accepting Adrian's offer. My assessment was incorrect. You were not the only one with that prognosis. Ye and you. The barest trace of a smile formed on Elena's lips. Most of all. Reconstituting the board required an additional month of tactical maneuvering. Elena compiled her evidence, constructed her case, and presented it during a fraught 4-hour meeting that culminated in 3 forced resignations and 2 additional abrupt departures. The remaining members were left in a state of profound shock. This is completely without precedent, commented Preston, an elderly man and a long-standing associate of her father's. to restructure the board with no substantive forewarning. I did provide a warning, Ilana countered, her tone devoid of warmth. I informed you all a month ago that a new paradigm was beginning. Your error was in choosing to dismiss my statement. She then introduced her new appointees, observing the veteran members' expressions as they realized she had populated the room with genuine specialists, professionals who would not challenge her based on age, gender, or perceived vulnerability. This remains highly irregular, Preston murmured, his voice diminished, as was my husband's conspiracy to have me murdered for my inheritance. We are all adjusting to irregular circumstances. The meeting concluded with her motions approved, a first since she assumed the chair. It was a victory, albeit a small one. Yet every victory exacts a cost. 2 days later, Antonio Castellano entered her office, entirely unannounced. Her assistant's attempt to intercept him was ineffectual. He moved past the woman like an apparition, taking a seat in the chair across from Elena's desk as if he held title to the building itself. Miss Moretti, we must confer. Elena neither rose nor extended a hand. I have no statement for you. Unfortunate, as I have a great deal to communicate to you. Antonia reclined, the picture of absolute composure. You have made some exceptionally grave allegations against my associates. Fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder. These are substantial accusations. They are 100% factual. Victor collaborated with you to seize my company. I possess the proof. You possess a recording of Victor Moretti, intoxicated and incoherent. It is valueless. There is nothing linking his pathetic ideation to me. Antonia's expression became severe. The financial trail suggests otherwise. Capital is fluid. Commercial transactions become convoluted. You are a novice in this environment, Miss Moretti. You do not comprehend the mechanics of the game. I comprehend that you assisted my husband in plotting my assassination for a portion of my estate. The concept is quite straightforward. Had I genuinely desired your elimination, you would be eliminated. Antonio delivered this with the flat detachment of a man commenting on meteorology. Victor was an arrogant, impulsive amateur. I advised him the strategy was flawed, but he was convinced of his ability to execute it. A shard of ice traced a path down Elena's spine. Is that an admission of guilt? It is a lesson in reality. Victor was removed due to his miscalculation of your nature. I will not repeat that error. Is that a threat? It is a proposition. Antonio leaned forward. You are failing. Your board is a farce. Your reputation is tarnished, and you acquire adversaries habitually. Allow me to assist you. Assist me? You just implied that if you wanted me deceased, but I do not. I want the Atlantic shipping lanes, and you will cede them to me. For an equitable price, naturally. I will pay market rates, execute a long-term contract, and provide the political insulation you will require when the Victor affair inevitably becomes public. The subject exhibited extreme emotional suppression while processing the associate's proposition. Her query was a direct confrontation of his complicity. Why would I consider an alliance with the man who abetted my husband's attempt on my life? His reply was a textbook exercise in psychological coercion, leveraging familiarity, threat, and projected failure. I represent a known variable. I can resolve your legal difficulties, or I can compound them. In 6 months, your board's loss of confidence will make you desperate. I am either your greatest resource or your most significant threat. The choice is yours. He concluded the interaction with a normalized demeanor, rising and adjusting his cuffs. Consider my offer. You have my contact. His departure left the subject in a state of acute physiological distress and cognitive chaos. She immediately initiated contact with her primary confidant, Adrian. Upon connection, Adrian's voice confirmed, Castellano presented an offer. When Elena detailed the conditions, a prolonged and weighty silence ensued from his end. He is probing for psychological fractures, he concluded. Victor perceived you as fragile. Castellano is merely testing that hypothesis. Elena queried her next action. You must refuse him. A public rejection is preferable. Demonstrate that you will not engage in his pathological games. And his retaliation? We will address that contingency as it arises. But Elena, you cannot display any vulnerability. Not to him. The moment you show indecision, you forfeit everything. Disconnecting, Elena observed the harbor, contemplating the ships that moved commerce, capital, and the crushing weight of her father's legacy. A profound fatigue settled deep within her. She was weary of the conflict, of the perpetual need for self-validation, of the anxiety that any decision could precipitate total collapse. Yet to capitulate was to concede, and her losses were already too great. She composed her response to Castellano. It was brief, formal, and conclusive. Moretti Shipping would not entertain a partnership with his consortium, presently or at any future time. She dispatched the message and prepared for the repercussions. The countermove arrived more swiftly than she had foreseen. Within a week, 2 of Moretti Shipping's primary clients nullified their contracts. No justification was provided, only the invocation of a clause terminating agreements that were years old. Maria identified the link. Both entities were heavily indebted to Castellano Financial Services, and it seems their debts were just called due. He is applying a strategic constriction, a demonstration of power. He is showing the world the consequences of refusing Antonio Castellano. A pure, cold anger surged within Elena. Can we withstand their loss? Temporarily, yes, but without replacing that revenue stream, and quickly we will fail to meet payroll. Then we replace it. James, activate every professional contact you have. Secure new clients, new routes, anything to staunch the financial hemorrhaging. James appeared skeptical. That is a formidable task. The industry rumor is that Moretti Shipping is already foundering. No one boards a vessel they believe is sinking. Then we will demonstrate that this vessel is sound. The subject's strategy centered on established European conduits, a legacy of her paternal precursor. Her counteroffensive was aggressive, designed to reclaim territory lost during Victor's destabilizing regime. This period, a 21-day siege, induced a state of hypervigilance. She navigated patriarchal resistance and opportunistic rivals, expertly masking her desperation. The utility of Adrian's intervention proved more significant than the subject's ego would consciously permit. He facilitated access, validated her authority, and projected a presence that altered social dynamics. While his spotless reputation compelled others to listen, their alliance also fostered speculation. Are you two involved? Her associate Maria inquired during a period of mutual exhaustion. The subject's denial was met with data, the frequency of his presence, his unwavering support, and his gaze. And how does he look at me? Like you're a puzzle he can't decide whether to figure out or to smash into 1,000 pieces. A brittle laugh escaped the subject, an admission of the observation's unnerving accuracy. But you are not intimate with him. No. The inquiry was dismissed, but Maria then correlated Adrian's gaze with that of Victor, triggering a trauma response in the subject. The subject's verbal defense, Adrian is not Victor, lacked conviction, especially when challenged further. In the interim, securing the contracts provided external validation, shifting peer perception from skepticism to a form of respect. A good showing, one James commented later. You may yet survive this calamity. May? The storm has not passed, but your ship is still intact. This conditional praise was processed. That evening, she confronted the primary trauma site, the marital home, which she had systematically avoided. Her perception of the space as a tomb indicates a profound disassociation from her former self. Methodically, she retrieved personal effects, a ritual of severance. Her attention was then drawn to Victor's desk drawer, the one he had always kept secured. Its lock was now shattered, a consequence of the official inquiry. Inside was a file she had never seen, labeled simply EM Personal. The subject's hand exhibited a tremor as she opened it. The contents included informal photographs from their wedding, juxtaposing Victor's gaze with her past devotion, which now induced a visceral revulsion. Beneath were medical documents detailing a protocol for psychological fracturing, including pharmaceuticals, and a schedule for her deconstruction. At the bottom, a single note in Victor's script read, "Insurance, in case she develops the wit to become a liability." The subject processed the monstrous reality of the statement. Victor had documented his conspiracy not as a confession, but as an arsenal to pathologize her should she exhibit resistance. He had constructed a psychological prison. However, Adrian's preemptive action had neutralized this contingency. The inescapable conclusion was that Adrian knew. He had understood Victor's endgame with greater clarity than its architect. Elena secured the folder and permanently exited the residence. She proceeded directly to Adrian's building, correctly assessing that his work-focused pathology would ensure his presence. His assistant was absent, allowing for direct entry into his office. He was examining documents, his head rising sharply at her arrival. "Elena, what is wrong?" She deposited the folder onto his desk. "You knew about Victor's backup plan, this fabricated medical file, this insurance. You knew he would have me institutionalized." Adrian's gaze noted the folder, but it remained untouched. "Yes. For how long? I knew before we ever met. A 3-year period of observation." Adrian had monitored Victor's cold, calculated actions. The subject's worldview fractured. 3 years? You have been observing this entire time? "I was waiting for the right moment," Adrian clarified. "The perfect leverage. You gave me both." The subject's voice faltered. "I gave you—" She had been an instrument in his long-term strategy from its inception. The alliance was a calculated maneuver. Adrian rose. "That is not the complete picture, is it not?" "Which part is inaccurate? The part where you manipulated me, or where you allowed me to believe I had agency?" He replied, "You always had a choice. You could have run." She retorted, "Because you presented it as the only one." "It was the only choice that left you with your dignity," he countered, his affect turning cold. "Yes, I was aware of Victor's plan, and I positioned myself to benefit from your situation. But I also ensured your survival. I armed you to destroy the man who intended to erase you. I assisted in reclaiming your assets that must have some value." She was unmoved. Its value was you achieving your objectives while I operated under an illusion of control. "You were," he insisted. "I simply ensured you had the correct data to execute the correct actions." A violent impulse surged through Elena, a need for catharsis from this new betrayal. She challenged, "Were you ever going to tell me?" He answered, "Perhaps when you were ready to hear it." Stop! The word was sharp. Do not frame this as an act of kindness. You identified an opportunity and exploited it. I was merely the instrument you required. You are much more than that. Am I? Or am I another chess piece you are maneuvering? Adrian grew completely still. When he spoke again, his tone was uncharacteristically soft. At first, yes, you were a means to an end. He paused. But you became an unforeseen variable, Elena. Her resilience was an outcome he had not predicted. And what does that change? She inquired. It changes everything. Because you are not a tool anymore. You are a player. That is what makes you so dangerous. Elena scrutinized his expression, searching for the strategic motive behind his candor. I don't trust you, she stated. Good. You shouldn't. Trust is a liability for individuals in our circumstances. Then what is the purpose of this? She pressed. Because we require one another. Together we are an unassailable entity. Our fates are now intertwined. Do you believe the Castellanos distinguish between us? To them we are a single target. The logic was sound, and she despised him for it. Fine. I want total transparency, she commanded. No more secrets. Her first condition was complete honesty and immediate notification of any threats. Agreed. Second, their partnership agreement required a total revision, mandating equal authority and revoking his unilateral control. A faint smirk formed on Adrian's lips. Now we are conducting business. He agreed Margaret would draft the new terms. Elena held the folder. I am not your instrument, Adrian. We proceed as equals. Equals. Adrian extended his hand to ratify their new contract. I can live with that. Elena paused, assessing before taking it, sealing an alliance built on strategy, not faith. She was internalizing a hard truth. Trust was a weakness, but power was a prerequisite for survival. For the first time, Elena Moretti possessed some. The contract arrived in 3 days. She reviewed every clause twice. Maria later voiced her misgivings. A document does not make you his equal. Adrian has operated in this world for a lifetime. You have 6 months of experience, I know. But I learn quickly, Maria replied. That is what causes my concern. Elena understood. The person she was becoming, clinical, strategic, was a stranger, a necessary erasure of her former, vulnerable self. This new version of her was still operational, a victory she would not concede. The subsequent months passed in a deceptive calm. Elena managed the company with input from Maria and Adrian. Her rising confidence shifted the tone of board meetings. Company profits stabilized and then grew, creating a legacy her father would have respected. Victor's trial was set for the spring. Margaret's reports were positive. The case was strong. The defense was already pursuing a plea bargain to reduce the primary charge. They are offering 15 years, Margaret stated by phone. With favorable conduct, his release could be in 10 years. A clinical chill descended upon Elena. A decade. Victor would be 45 upon his release, with an entire life remaining to architect another's ruin. What if the deal is refused and we proceed to trial? She inquired. Then you provide testimony. You will be forced to publicly re-experience the trauma while his counsel systematically deconstructs you. They will leverage the substances to portray you as psychologically unstable, to implant doubt about your testimony in the jurors' minds. But his confession is on the recording, which they will posit was obtained illegally within his private residence without consent. A skilled lawyer could have it dismissed, and our case would be critically compromised. With her eyes closed, A familiar, controlled rage began to surface within Elena. Could he truly evade accountability? An acquittal is unlikely, but the duration of his sentence could fall far short of what justice dictates. It is a deficiency in our legal framework. My apologies. The communication ceased, leaving Elena isolated in her office, her gaze unfocused. After the ordeal, the meticulous planning, the public demolition of Victor's reputation, he might still achieve a partial victory. The imbalance was a visceral shock, but she was internalizing that justice was a construct. Power was the only objective reality. She contacted Adrian. I must ensure Victor is incarcerated for the maximum possible term. What is required? His response was clinical. Your testimony. You must occupy that stand, construct a vivid portrait of his offenses, and force them to acknowledge the predator. Margaret indicates his defense will dismantle me. They will make a concerted effort, Adrian conceded. But you possess a resilience they cannot fathom, a strength Victor failed to recognize. A pause ensued. The operative question is, can you withstand that level of psychological warfare? Elena's mind returned to the woman who had stood, trembling, outside that study, overhearing the plan for her own termination. That iteration of herself was fractured. The woman she had become would see the courthouse incinerated to ensure Victor's accountability. Arrange a meeting with the prosecution. I will testify. Elena? I am testifying, she reiterated, and I will ensure every individual in that room understands his true nature. The preparations constituted their own unique form of psychological distress. Day after day with the district attorney, analyzing every detail, every interaction, every item of evidence, they had her review the recording repeatedly, until Victor's voice was etched into her psyche. Elena Moretti, pregnant, unstable, loses vehicular control in a storm, tragic, entirely heartbreaking. With each playback, a fraction of her psyche turned to permafrost. Maria was present for every session, compiling her own notes, posing questions the legal team overlooked. She was constructing her own file, her own schematic of the conspiracy. Do you know what I find most disturbing? Maria reflected late one evening. The duration he must have been orchestrating this. The pills, the fabricated pregnancy, the accident. That degree of premeditation requires months of planning, potentially years. What is your hypothesis? Maria stated it directly. My point is he was plotting your murder long before you perceived any threat. That is not merely cruel, Elena. That kind of patience is a distinct classification of terror. The implication registered with Elena forcefully. You believe Adrian is fundamentally like him. I believe Adrian observed Victor deconstructing you for 3 years and remained inert until he identified a personal opportunity. That is also patience, and that is also terrifying. He preserved my life, Elena processed. He preserved his asset. You were simply the instrument. Maria took her hand. I am not advising you to sever ties. I am advising you to never lose sight of the man he is. I have not forgotten, but at times discussing strategy late at night, or as he clarified maritime law, Elena wondered if she was starting to. Consequently, their alliance was evolving into something new, a dynamic she could not yet classify. Adrian maintained a model of professional decorum, never once violating a boundary. Yet there were instances. A hand on her arm, a steadying gesture during a tense negotiation, the way his focus would remain on her after she executed a brilliant business maneuver. the sharp, protective inflection in his voice if anyone dared to challenge her. It registered as something significant. Elena simply lacked a diagnosis for it and had no time for analysis. The trial loomed, monopolizing her cognitive resources. Her arrival at the courthouse was a media event, a barrage of journalists and cameras that positioned her as the reluctant protagonist. She wore a severe black suit Maria had selected, a stark departure from the softer palette Victor had insisted upon. Margaret was waiting at the courthouse steps. "Are you prepared?" "Not in the slightest, but I am present nonetheless." The courtroom resembled a stage set for a legal drama. Heavy wood, high ceilings, the entire environment designed to project institutional authority. And there was Victor at the defense table, looking diminished in his orange jumpsuit, yet not nearly diminished enough. His gaze met hers across the room, and for one disorienting second, Elena saw the man who had comforted her as she mourned a child who never was. The man who had promised her everything would be fine. Then she recalled his voice on the recording, and instantly the cognitive distortion shattered. The prosecution called her name almost at once. Elena placed her hand on the Bible and recited the oath. The prosecutor, a woman in her 40s named Chen, with no ties to Margaret, had built a career on dismantling domestic abusers. She guided Elena through the chronology, her tone gentle but her questions having the force of a demolition tool. The marriage, the pills, the night in his study. "Can you describe for the jury what you overheard?" Elena inhaled slowly. "I heard my husband detailing the plan for my murder. He was discussing the timeline, the methodology, how to present it as a tragic accident. He made reference to the fictitious pregnancy he had invented, the drugs he was administering to my system. He spoke of it as if..." Her voice fractured, "as if I were a logistical challenge, not a human being, an obstruction to be cleared." And what was her affective state upon hearing this? She had experienced terror, a deep sense of betrayal, and the feeling of being an absolute fool for her own blindness. An objection regarding her feelings was overruled. Chen continued her systematic line of questioning, methodically creating a profile of Victor as a calculating predator, devoid of empathy. Then, the cross-examination commenced. Victor's attorney was precisely the type of predator Elena had braced for, a man in an expensive suit with an artificial smile, the kind who rationalizes his repugnant work as a simple profession. "Mrs. Moretti, you are taking several prescription medications, correct?" "I was, on substances from my husband's associate, who lacked a medical license." "But you made the choice to consume them." "I made the choice to trust my husband when he claimed they were for my anxiety. I had no knowledge their objective was to heighten my suggestibility." "Were you ever diagnosed with an anxiety disorder prior to your marriage?" "No." "So this condition coincidentally materialized after you married Mr. Moretti." Elena perceived the trap he was constructing. "The anxiety materialized when he began to administer the drugs. Or could the strain of managing a corporation while grieving your parents have caused genuine health issues that required medication?" "No, I was functioning before Victor initiated his plan." For a fleeting moment, the attorney's polished facade fractured. "That strikes me as quite theatrical, Mrs. Moretti. Do you possess medical evidence that these prescriptions were harmful?" Margaret rose. "The prosecution has already entered into evidence, Dr. Hammond's affidavit, which confirms the substances were intended to compromise Mrs. Moretti's mental state. Dr. Hammond, who faces his own legal troubles and is likely leveraging his testimony for a plea agreement, the defense lawyer retorted. The psychological assault persisted for another hour. They attempted to frame Elena as unstable, a woman gripped by delusion. They contorted her covert recordings into evidence of a pre-existing paranoia, but Elena refused to fracture. Against every insinuation, against every falsehood, she remained resolute. The broken wife was gone. A survivor, a combatant. The true victor had taken her place. When she at last descended from the stand, her entire frame trembled with a combination of raw rage and profound exhaustion. Her role was concluded. 21 days later, the verdict came down. Victor was adjudicated guilty on all counts: conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. He received a sentence of a quarter century without parole eligibility for 15 years. Elena was not present in court for the judgment. She was in a meeting regarding Pacific shipping lanes when the text arrived. 25 years, Margaret wrote. He'll be nearly 60 when he's even eligible for release. Elena texted her gratitude, stored her phone, and refocused on the meeting. The victory felt remote, like a narrative concerning someone else. That evening, she drove to the docks, a location from her youth before the company grew into an empire. Seated on the pier, she observed the colossal ships gliding like phantoms over the black water, attempting to access an emotion appropriate for the occasion. Relief? Vindication? The only sensation she could identify was a weariness that had lodged deep within her bones, and a profound feeling of being isolated. I suspected I might locate you here. Elena glanced over. Adrian was there, hands in his pockets, his typical intensity muted, as if he had actually concluded his workday at a normal hour. How did you know? It was a reasoned deduction. This is where you come to process information. She didn't press for how he knew that. Adrian's insight was total. It was what made him so effective. He sat beside her, their shoulders nearly in contact, and for a considerable time, they both just observed the water in absolute silence. You've prevailed, Adrian observed at last. Victor is contained, the corporation stabilized, the Castellanos are in full retreat. All objectives met. So why is my emotional response one of loss? Because you're processing that victory does not heal trauma. It merely clears the board for the subsequent engagement. Elena watched him, the architect of her liberation who operated on his own intricate schema. And what is your next engagement? Standard protocol, expand the empire, forge new alliances, remain 10 steps ahead. And my function in this grand schema? Adrian's eyes met hers, and something in them shifted, a glint of an expression that felt pathologically real. That is the central paradox, Elena. You have no function. You were never projected to be a peer. You were never meant to challenge me, to introduce doubt into my own meticulous machinations. Yet you have. Is that a complaint? It is an observation. He paused. I've analyzed our pact, the equal equity, the absolute transparency. Any other subject would have taken the capital, but you fought for control. It was magnificent. You were a capable instructor? I gave you the operational rules. You mastered the art of it autonomously. A warmth bloomed in Elena's chest, a sensation as beautiful as it was lethal. Why reveal this now? So you understand the entity you have become. You are not the terrified subject from the warehouse. You have become a power to your enemies, to the Castellanos, and to me if I were ever to exhibit a systemic failure. Should I be concerned about that? That you perceive me as too great a power? A genuine smile touched Adrian's eyes. You should perpetually be concerned. That state of awareness is what has kept you viable. He stood, offering her his hand. Elena accepted it, his touch a galvanic shock against the cool air, and she wondered when their transactional arrangement had begun to feel like another phenomenon entirely. There is something I require you to observe, Adrian said. In my office, if you'll come. Elena knew she should refuse to maintain the perimeter she had fought so hard to establish, but she complied with him anyway. At this late hour, Adrian's tower was a silent giant, housing only security personnel and ghosts. They rode the elevator to his floor, passing the rooms where they'd plotted Victor's ruin and entered his private study. He handed her a folder. Inside were deeds and transfer papers, a stack of legal documents she couldn't immediately process. What is all this? The house. Your former house. I assume you do not want it. I've had it appraised and prepared for sale, but before it is listed, you have a choice. A choice about what? To reduce it to ashes. Elena's head snapped up. Adrian's face was perfectly grave. I acquired the neighboring lot 6 months ago. If we demolish both properties, their consolidated land value appreciates significantly. We can redevelop, or we can erase the site entirely, leaving only rubble. Your decision. Her response was disbelief. You are being serious. His was clinical. Entirely. That location is a monument to every trauma Victor inflicted upon you. I assumed its eradication might be desirable. Elena examined the documents, the address of a future that had been stolen. The very cage where she was sedated, broken, and nearly executed. The prospect of its incineration was a potent and intoxicating fantasy. When? She asked, her voice low. The moment you give the directive. The demolition was scheduled for 1 month out, following the subject's retrieval of any remaining personal effects. There was little she wished to recover. Victor's association had contaminated nearly every object. From the shed, she reclaimed her mother's gardening shears, and from an untouched box, a single wedding photograph of her parents. All other items were liquidated, donated, or disposed of. On the scheduled day, Elena observed the site with Adrian and Maria as crews performed final preparations. The structure appeared diminished, its psychological power nullified. It was merely a building, no longer the prison of her memory. A final opportunity to reconsider, Adrian offered quietly. My mind is not changed. The foreman gave the signal, and with a detonation, the first wall collapses, a tremor propagating through Elena's body, then a second and a third, until the building implodes in a storm of dust and splinters. As it disappeared, you could feel something inside her settle into equilibrium. This was not healing. It was closure. Victor's final symbol of power was now officially nullified. Maria asked her about the sensation. Her answer, like I can breathe again. They leave before the cleanup crew begins its work. Elena has a new world to manage, meetings, contracts, an entire empire. 6 months later, she stands before the company at the annual shareholder meeting. The room is at capacity. Board members, key investors, even dock workers have come for the address. A year ago, this would have triggered a terror response. Now, she's in a state of perfect homeostasis. She discusses recovery, new trade routes, and a plan for the future. She speaks of her father's vision, but makes it clear they are building their own. She never says Victor's name. He is just a ghost decaying in a cell. The applause she receives is authentic. They no longer see a privileged girl performing a role. They see a sovereign on her throne. Adrian stands at the rear of the room, observing her with an expression that is part pride, part satisfaction, and part the possessiveness of a man who co-authored the victory. Later, they are in his car. Elena had abandoned her own. It was linked to too many negative stimuli. Now Adrian drives her when their schedules merge. "Impressive speech," he says, merging into traffic. "Thanks. Maria wrote most of it." "Perhaps, but you delivered it. That is all that is relevant." They ride in silence, then Adrian's voice lowers. "Listen, there is something I must disclose to you." And just like that, Elena's defense mechanisms re-engage. "What is it?" "Do you recall asking if I planned everything from the beginning?" "I recall you confirming that you did." "Well, there is another layer to that narrative." Adrian's gaze never left the road. "I was not just monitoring Victor. I was observing your entire family unit, specifically your father." A cold dread snaked down Elena's spine. Why? 20 years ago, your father took a massive contract from my father's company. The loss ruined him. My father died attempting to recover. The man was seeking retribution. Against my father. Against Moretti Shipping. Against the name that destroyed mine. Adrian's jaw was a hard line. My entire strategy was to wait until your father was at his most vulnerable, and then I would destroy him. But he died before I had the chance. That business with your parents. Elena's heart stopped. What about it? Adrian finally met her eyes, and they were utterly devoid of affect. It was not a business trip, Elena. I had their vehicle tampered with. I am the one who caused their deaths. And in that moment, the world fractured. Elena could not draw a breath, could not think, her mind simply ceasing to function. Her parents, the crash that had destroyed her life and thrown her to a predator like Victor, Adrian. It was all him. "Stop the car!" Her voice was not her own. "Elena? Stop this car. Immediately." He swerved to the curb and she practically fell out. She took perhaps 3 steps before her knees gave out and she impacted the pavement. Her parents, her father's laugh, her mother's hands in the garden soil, the way they used to look at one another like no one else existed, erased, not by chance, but because Adrian Keller needed his revenge. She felt him standing above her. "I'm sorry, I know that means." "Don't." Her voice was a raw, broken thing. "Do not dare tell me you are sorry." She turned on him, a year of steel-clad control shattering in an instant. "You killed them. You murdered my parents for a company, and then you used me. You made me think you were my savior when you were just... I was your savior. Every single action I took to protect you from Victor was real. Only because you wanted to be the one to break me, not him." Adrian flinched, because it was a truth he could not deny. Initially, yes, that was the objective. But conditions changed. You changed them. "I do not believe a word you say." "Then believe this." He pulled an envelope from his coat and held it out. "I had this prepared 3 months ago. I was waiting for the correct moment. But there is no correct moment. There is only the truth." Her hands trembled as she tore it open. Inside was a legal document signing over his entire share of Moretti Shipping to her. A staggering 22% of the company handed back to her, no conditions attached. "I do not want your company," Adrian says, his voice flat. "My war for revenge is concluded. All I want is..." He seems to lose the words. "For you to be free, not from me, not from another cage." Elena could only stare at the paper, at his signature, which had already made it legally done. Why tell me now? Why not just disappear? Because you deserved the entire truth. Every piece of it. My entire relationship with you was constructed upon a lie. I am done with it. You need to know who I am and exactly what I have done. Then what happens to us is your decision. What happens to us is that I will never see you again. I know Adrian's voice is hollow, but his eyes are screaming. The transaction is finalized. My resignation will be on the board's table in the morning. Then I will be out of your life. He starts to turn. Elena stands rooted to the pavement, the documents clutched in her hand like a verdict. She holds absolute control of her company now, free from the web of Adrian's influence, a solitary empire she constructed. Yet the cost was steep. The man who saved her was the very architect of her downfall. She thinks of her father, the brawler. Enzo Moretti never backed down from a conflict, but his ascent left a wake of broken men, men like Adrian's father, crushed on his way to the top. There are no absolute victories, no flawless saviors, only individuals navigating impossible scenarios and managing the aftermath. A new determination solidifies in Elena as she composes herself. Her gaze focuses on Adrian, the architect of her parents' demise and her own ascendancy. I can never grant you absolution, she states, her voice even, not for your actions against them. I doubt I ever will. I am aware, he replies, but I will not lose this company. I will not allow their sacrifice to be rendered meaningless. Elena takes a sharp, stabilizing breath. I will construct something they would have respected, an entity that creates rather than destroys, and you are going to assist me. Adrian's head turns sharply toward her. What? The debt you are owed is immeasurable. Therefore, you will dedicate your life to its repayment. Your network, your capital, your aptitude for clinical cruelty, all will be repurposed to transform Moretti Shipping into a benevolent institution. His protest. Elena, my proximity is the last thing you want. She clarified, I do not want you in my personal sphere, but your skill set is indispensable. She added, and you require a path to redemption, however narrow. Her gaze was an ultimatum, a silent conflict waged between them. These are the new conditions. Accept them or I will expose you. Your reputation, your entire empire, I will reduce it to ash. Adrian observed her, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. Understood. I accept. And Adrian, should you deceive me again, or attempt to control me, or harm anyone I value, I will not merely destroy you. I will erase your existence entirely. Is that understood? Perfectly. Elena returned to her vehicle, leaving him standing alone. A profound silence filled the car as they departed. The operational parameters had been fundamentally altered, and she could not yet determine if the act was one of genius or folly. The choice, however, was hers. 1 year later, the foundation is established. Elena is at a podium addressing a crowd of press and benefactors. Adrian is seated in the first row, his focus on her unwavering. He has allocated half of his fortune to this enterprise without question. It is his penance for a transgression that defies absolution. Their interaction is strictly professional, separated by a vast and unbridgeable chasm. Elena leverages his ruthless efficiency, but remains ever mindful of his underlying nature. Her emotional state varies between contempt and a clinical acknowledgement of the guilt that consumes him, often a bitter synthesis of the two. Maria stands with her new CFO, and the one individual Elena trusts without reservation. the Moretti sisters, building a new dynasty from the ruins. Following the event, Elena finds a secluded corner to check her device. A notification from the correctional facility is displayed. Victor had attempted to send a letter, and the warden was requesting her authorization to forward it. Without hesitation, Elena deleted the message. She had no need for his rationalizations, his justifications, or his pathetic bids for continued relevance. He was an artifact of a former life, contained where he could inflict no further harm. She represented the future, not entirely whole, not fully healed, but in command, at last, in total command. Elena Moretti moved into the Boston night. The enterprise was hers, her objective was clear, and for the first time in what seemed an eternity, so was her life. She had acquired the ability to identify predators before they struck, to wield power without succumbing to its corrupting influence, and to recognize that survival may necessitate an alliance with a lesser evil. The traumatized, shattered individual who once stood paralyzed before Victor's office would be unrecognizable to her current self. And that, in the final analysis, was the entire purpose of her ordeal.
Let's be honest, Elena Moretti's story hurts because everybody in it is playing chess with a woman who initially thinks she's at a dinner table. That's the tragedy. She walks into marriage thinking she's building a home, and meanwhile, Victor is over there building a succession plan. He isn't loving her, he's managing her, he's not listening to her symptoms with concern. He's reviewing whether the fake pregnancy and the pills are producing the right emotional texture. That is evil on a whole different level because it means Elena's suffering is not accidental collateral damage. It is product testing. The genius of the story is that it doesn't reveal Victor as some explosively violent monster from the start. No, he's much worse than that. He's composed, efficient, polite, the kind of villain who would probably straighten a picture frame before plotting someone's death. That makes the betrayal hit harder because the audience has to sit with a very uncomfortable truth. Cruelty does not always look chaotic. Sometimes it looks calm, elegant, and highly organized. Victor is terrifying because he knows the value of appearances. He understands that a grieving young heiress with a handsome husband and a respected doctor at her side will almost always be read as protected, not hunted. Then the study scene arrives and the whole emotional engine of the story shifts. Elena hears her husband calmly discussing the date and mechanics of her death, and in that instant, the audience realizes something brutal. She was never in a marriage. She was in a merger. The baby was fake, the care was fake, the concern was fake, and even her own exhaustion had been manufactured as part of the acquisition strategy. That's why this scene is more than a plot twist. It is the collapse of reality. Elena isn't just heartbroken. She is epistemologically shattered. She can no longer trust memory, touch, routine, or her own body. Everything has to be retranslated from scratch. And that's where the first life lesson lands. The most dangerous manipulation is the kind that trains someone to mistrust themselves before they ever mistrust the manipulator. If a person can be made to doubt their instincts, they become easier to lead, easier to shame, easier to erase. Victor didn't just want Elena dead, he wanted her disoriented first. That way, even if she started sensing something was wrong, she would interpret the alarm as personal instability instead of evidence. That's what makes him so effective as a villain. He isn't merely violent, he is interpretive. He rewrites what Elena thinks her own life means. Now here comes the part where the story gets smarter than a standard revenge thriller. Elena escapes, yes, but she doesn't immediately become a superhero, she becomes strategic. That's different. She reaches out to Adrian Keller because she understands that innocence will not save her. And Adrian, to the story's credit, is not presented as some magical corrective male. He's dangerous too. He's useful, sharp, and very obviously operating from his own agenda. In other words, Elena doesn't go from one safe man to another. She goes from one predator who hides his hunger to another predator who doesn't bother disguising it quite as much. That choice is ugly but realistic. It leads to the second major lesson. Survival is not always morally clean. People in danger do not get to shop from a shelf of pure options. Sometimes the only available ally is compromised. Sometimes the ladder out of the pit is being held by someone who also profits from your climb. Elena knows that, and the story respects her enough not to pretend otherwise. She makes the deal anyway because living is more urgent than idealism. Then the boardroom sequence gives the audience what it has been craving, the reversal. But what makes that scene satisfying is not just that Victor gets exposed, it's that Elena has learned the language of power before she confronts him. She does not burst in wounded and emotional hoping truth will be enough. She arrives with documentation, timing, institutional leverage, and public optics on her side. That's what makes the scene land. She is no longer simply the injured party. She is now a narrator of evidence. And whoever controls the evidence controls the story. Victor spent years defining Elena as fragile, sedated, unstable, and unfit. In the boardroom, Elena defines Victor as a fraud, a conspirator, and a murderer. That inversion is the emotional payoff. But the story still refuses to let her have a clean victory because then Adrian's truth comes out. And wow, this is where the script just stabs the audience straight through the ribs. The man who helped her survive was also tied to the death of her parents, so suddenly the whole narrative broadens. Elena is not just the victim of one marriage gone wrong, she is the product of years of male revenge, ambition, inheritance warfare, and strategic cruelty. Victor used her adulthood. Adrian helped shape the loss that made her vulnerable in the first place. Different methods, same disease. Men deciding that their pain, hunger, or entitlement gives them the right to reorganize a woman's life without her consent. At that point, the easy endings are all off the table. She can't just fall into Adrian's arms. She can't just kill him and walk off into healing. She can't simply forgive him because that would insult the dead. This is why Elena's actual final move is so compelling. She chooses consequence over catharsis. She refuses absolution, but she also refuses to let rage make her stupid. She keeps the company. She forces Adrian to return power. She makes him useful under terms she controls. She transforms guilt into obligation. That's not romance. That's governance. And maybe that is the deepest lesson in the entire story. Power is not revenge. Revenge is one emotional event. Power is what remains after the emotional event is over. Elena learns that. Victor going to prison matters, but it is not enough. Adrian confessing matters, but it is not enough. The house being demolished matters, but it is not enough. None of those moments alone equal freedom. Freedom arrives only when Elena understands the company, reshapes the board, trusts Maria, builds the foundation, and starts directing wealth and pain towards something larger than survival. In other words, she stops measuring victory by who falls and starts measuring it by what she can build. That's what makes the ending feel mature instead of merely dramatic. Elena does not become pure again. She does not return to her pre-trauma self. The story is too honest for that fantasy. She becomes harder, yes, but not hollow. Sharper, but not monstrous. She learns to read men, read systems, read silence, read contracts, read motive. She loses innocence and gains literacy. Pain taught her the language of power, but she decides not to speak it exactly the way Victor and Adrian did. That is how she wins without becoming them. So if someone asks what Elena Moretti's story is really about, the simplest answer is this. It is about a woman who was nearly erased by people who mistook her trust for weakness, and who survived long enough to turn every lie into leverage. Victor thought love made her soft. Adrian thought pain made her useful. The world thought grief made her manageable. All of them were wrong. What Elena ultimately becomes is not a victim, not a queen, not a saint, not even a classic avenger. She becomes the one person in the story who finally understands the whole board and still chooses to build instead of merely destroy. That is why her ending lingers, not because she gets justice in a neat moral package, but because after all the manipulation, all the gaslighting, all the death, and all the deals with dangerous men, she does the most radical thing possible. She keeps authorship.